Hi, and welcome to today's class, which is Digitizing for Applique, with me, Trevor Conquergood from Sunset Stitches. Well, I want to say I hope everybody's having a wonderful day today, and thank you very much for attending this afternoon's class. Before I get started with my topic for today, which is Digitizing for Applique, just want to go over a few things that let you know what you can expect from the webinar. Probably talk for about the next 60 minutes, and I will accept questions if you have any. And so if you're not sure how to ask a question, you should be able to see my screen and hear my voice. And there is a control panel for the webinar. And if you don't immediately see it, what you're looking for is small orange arrow that is somewhere on the right-hand side. And if you click on that, you'll be able to, open up the control panel and then find the questions box. And that's a good way to communicate with me during the class. Now, but once I get started with my presentation, I may not check the questions box all the time, but certainly I'll leave some time at the end to go through and check any questions. So feel free to use that to communicate with me during the class. Yeah, otherwise, you can sit back and relax. I expect that I'll be able to spend about an hour and go over some of the different tips and tricks about creating applique using the Wilcom Embroidery Studio software. Perhaps before I get started, one thing I could say is I've already got somebody who's asked me if I'll record the class, and I should also mention I am recording this class, and I'll be happy to provide a copy of the recording. If you want to get a copy of the recording, please send me an email, and you'll find on the screen right now my email address is trevor@sunsetstitches.com, and I'll be presenting today's class. And if you email me, I'll be happy to get you a copy of the class. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I guess I've been a long-time customer of Wilcom, and I'm certainly happy to be a training partner of Wilcom's. I actually started digitizing in 1984 and learned about creating embroidery and family business called Stitchertize. And today I spend most of my time working with people, learning about embroidery and embroidery software, and certainly my pleasure to be presenting this class today, which is actually the first class I've done for the applique topic using the Embroidery Studio 3 software. So kind of excited about that, and I'm very happy with the new version of the software. So all of that said, today's class is going to be about creating applique, and we'll talk about, I guess, the reasons that we might want to applique, and I'll go through how to use the applique tools and how to create applique, and got some examples. And so I guess the first thing I'll ask is, why do people applique? And generally there's more than one reason. I guess one reason would be to save stitches. Now, obviously, if you've got a large, shirt front with a, large filled-in background, if you can use a piece of applique to do that, it's going to take a lot less time and a lot less stitches than it would to fill in that area. So certainly saving stitches is one reason to do applique. So, another applique is going to be for the effect or the appearance of it. You may want to use some special textured fabric or patterned fabric that has just the perfect look and feel for your design. If you can imagine, a team having a basketball team and having some special fabric that kind of had the look and feel and texture of a basketball skin, and then using that to applique the team name or something, so maybe there's something along those lines. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to go to my Embroidery Studio workspace now, and I'll just show you on the left-hand side. This is the tool here that's for creating an automatic applique, and if I click on the tool and hold, it will show me that there are more than one tool option to this, I guess, tool group. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mouse over top of the little dotted line at the top of that tool group, and I'm going to click and drag to bring my applique tool and make it be floating over top of my workspace. And I guess that's just a convenient way of keeping toolbars available for your use. I could do that, for example, Sometimes I like to use this toolbar here, and I'll pull that out. And sometimes I like to use Fusion Fill toolbar, Complex Fill, whatever toolbar you want to use, you can pull them off. And so I'll just go ahead and open a few of the toolbars. Now, the Applique tool is where we'll start. So this is the Applique tool here, and once I click on that tool, it tells me down at the bottom, right here, it says enter point 1 on boundary 1, and basically what it's saying is draw the shape. And if I left click, I get corner points, and if I right click, I'll get curved or rounded points. When I hit enter, it'll close the shape. And it asks me for point 1 on boundary number 2. In other words, do you want to have a hole in your applique? If not, you hit enter again. It asks for an entry point. If I don't care, I'll hit enter again, or otherwise I could click wherever I wanted it to enter, so maybe I'll pick this spot right here. Where do I want it to finish or exit? I'll pick the same spot. And enter the frame out position, so I can choose where I want that to frame out. Oh, that's unfortunate. My tool let go and started over. I'll draw another shape and explain why. Again, left click for corners. Let go already. All right, hold on here. I'll get this down, and then I'm having trouble with my computer. I'll just get the applique made and explain. Okay, give me a second here. So I use a virtual computer, and that means my PC is actually on my Mac computer, and sometimes when I'm doing, it works fine if you want to run that way, but I have a conflict between my mouse when I'm using this GoToWebinar service. In other words, I'll be able to work all week long and not have any troubles, but when I'm presenting the classes, sometimes the tool will just let go right in the middle, and I feel like the GoToWebinar and the Parallels desktop are fighting over the mouse. All that said, it shouldn't cause too much trouble for me in class today. I don't have to draw that many shapes. Anyway, what did I do? I clicked on the tool, and I drew a shape. And when I hit enter, it closes the shape. And like I said, if I don't care where the entry point is, I can just keep hitting enter until it fills, it creates this shape. So I've made 2 embroidery shapes, and they're applique. And you'll notice right away if I look at those shapes here in my object color list that each one of them has 1, 2, 3 color changes associated. It's all one object, but it actually has 3 color changes. And so that's because it's an applique, and it takes, I guess, multiple colors to sew an applique. Now, maybe what I'm going to do is just zoom in closely over top of some of the embroidery so that you can see what's here. You see there's a pink sort of run stitch placement line, there's a purple zigzag tack down stitch, and then there's a navy blue satin stitch cover. And all I did was draw the shape. The software is going to generate the stitches. Now, we have the ability to adjust that. And what I'll do is I'll select this object. And so we have this object selected, and so these object properties are specific to this object. And notice here that under Special, because I drew an applique, it automatically came up with the Applique tab, which is found under Special. It's an applique, and these are all the specific settings to do with an applique. So the first thing that you see is what kind of applique fabric do you want to show in your, I guess, shape. And this is something that's new in version 3. We didn't have this previously. If I click on the little triangle here, it brings up an applique fabric interface or dialog that I can go ahead and I could choose from the factory sort of preset fabrics that comes with the software. So I can choose from any number of styles of fabric, pick a color for my fabric, and when I say OK, it'll put the fabric in my shape. So it gives you the concept that it's an applique and that it's filled in with this special fabric or whatever. you can also choose a custom fabric. So if you don't want to use the ones that I guess came with it, you could choose custom and then browse your computer to select a scan or a photograph of any pattern or whatever it is that you want to put in there. Or you could just pick a color. So you could say, I don't care if it looks like fabric, but I want it to have, an orange background color or something. All right, so now the next part is, I guess, the different settings for the different layers. And remember I said there was a pink run stitch placement line, there was a purple zigzag tack down, and then there was the navy blue cover stitch. The first thing that you have to decide when you make an applique is the style of applique you're making. And in this case, it's either pre-cut or trim in place. Those are two different styles. And in general, the difference is pre-cut is, I guess, just as it sounds. You're going to actually pre-cut out the shape of the applique fabric. And when you go to the machine, this assumes that you've already got this funky shape already made and cut out. We could talk about how to do that, how to make a template and everything else, but that's the concept. So the alternative is a trim in place applique. So if I select this applique shape and change it from pre-cut to trim in place, notice that here in the object list, it now has 4 colors: pink, green, purple, and the navy. And if I zoom in closely again, you'll see that the pink and the green are actually the identical run line. And so what happens is it sews the pink run stitch and the machine stops. Not only does it stop, it actually jumps off. And that's what these stitches are, the jump off. So the idea is the machine sews the run stitch and then jumps up here and stops. And now, because the machine jumped up here, imagine this is where your needle is. That means that the embroidery head is behind this, and that in front of this is where the embroidery hoop is easily accessible to the machine operator. So that's the whole point of having a jump off, is to make it more easy to access the applique area. Anyhow, now because it's a trim in place applique, you can just lay a piece of fabric over top of that run stitch. Not a pre-cut piece, just a big chunk of fabric, any size, whatever, as long as it covers the run stitch. And you push start, and the machine returns to this place and sews the same run stitch again, and then jumps off to the same spot again. And now when the machine stops, you use your scissors and you trim the fabric along this line right here. You trim your applique fabric. When you push start, the machine will now do the zigzag tack down, which is in general stepping onto the applique fabric and off of the applique fabric, going around the shape with very open spacing so that it quickly walks around the shape and secures your applique fabric. You can use all sorts of different products to help stick your applique so that it doesn't move in the meantime. Those are more important when you're doing a pre-cut applique. When you do the trim in place applique, you don't really need to have, this stuck down because you sewed it down with that run stitch. And so really the tack down is just there in this case to make sure that even though you sewed a run stitch and cut around it, depending on how sort of tightly woven your fabric is, it may be starting to want to unravel and pull away from that little run stitch. So this, again, the zigzag tack down becomes the security that says we'll sew this in place. It'll be, well appliqued or stuck down. And then if the cover stitch is simply to finish the shape off and make it look sort of attractive. So that's what it looks like in general. I'm just going to turn on the true view or the 3D appearance so you can see what it turns out like. So the choice of pre-cut versus trim in place adds that additional run stitch. Now, the run stitch, you can change the stitch length of that run stitch, and if you want, you can also offset that run stitch from the line that you digitized. I'll come back to the offset in a moment, and we'll talk about, I guess, offsetting things and how and why. The next thing we have is the zigzag tack down. So this is the color that was purple. And you can adjust the style, so it's a zigzag, or it could be a straight run stitch, or an E-stitch. So you have 3 different choices. You can adjust the density or the spacing of them and the number of times that it goes around it, the width of it, and this has actually been set 30% to the outside and 70% to the inside. So let's take a look. The offset has been adjusted. So first of all, I'll just turn off the 3D view. And let's see, we'll select this object and change that from a zigzag to an E-stitch. So see, you can see how it changes the style. And if I change the 3mm spacing to 4mm spacing, it gives more space in between them. So you can sort of see that. What I was saying, so the width, I get to decide the width of it, how wide are these. So if you want to make them smaller or wider, you can change that. Now, it's been offset. So here's the line of the applique, and it's been set 70% to the inside and 30% to the outside. So has, after the tack down, is the cover stitch, which is also set at 70 and 30. And so the idea is you have the ability, the applique shape is the applique shape, and you have the ability to move any of these 3 components, the tack down, the guidelines, the tack down, or the cover stitch, off that. So I'm going to make them all be right at like the middle, right down, all at 50-50. So I'll make both the cover stitch and the zigzag at 50. So here's what you see. So the offset, the frame out is set at offset 0. It's right on the line. The satin column has been set 50-50, 50 to the inside, 50 to the outside. The zigzag tack down, 50-50, 50 to the inside, 50 to the outside. And so there's lots of reasons why you may want to adjust those to achieve different applique styles or appearances. Assuming that you were going with a satin cover, as we have now, the main reason why I would put an offset would be to compensate for the applique fabric itself. If your applique fabric is very thick, and when you cut it, it's going to be difficult to cut, you know, close to this line, and therefore you may have quite a bit of fabric that's sticking out on the other side, then that might be a case where you might actually want to have more of your applique. I'll just change the cover stitch for in the beginning. So more of the applique towards the outside. So we'll take that to be 70% to the outside and 30% to the inside. And presuming that you like that, you might want to make this zigzag tack down kind of match. So taking it up 70 to be the equal kind of, oh, I took it the wrong way. I want it 70 to the outside. There. So the concept is my fabric's really fat, and so therefore I need to move the cover stitch and the zigzag tack down a little bit away from the shape where we cut it out to compensate for the big fat, you know, polar fleece or whatever it was. Now, the reverse. Maybe my applique fabric is some very delicate organza, and almost as soon as I trim around it, it wants to start to unravel and let go. Therefore, I want to have more coverage to the inside, and so I could change that inside-outside sort of percentage to be towards the inside as opposed to the outside. So that's the, I guess, the theory between why you would offset those. The other one that you might offset is the actual run stitch or the center run stitch line. So again, that's the applique shape. If you want to offset that run stitch by whatever, any amount, it'll move that run stitch inside or outside, just that small amount. So you have that ability to adjust. So there's different adjustments and different styles of applique. And in general, that's how it works. You're going to draw an applique shape, and then you're going to choose all these settings. Now, the cover stitch, although we can control in here the width of it, so it's set at 4 millimeters. If I make it 3 millimeters, sorry, 2, I'll make it 3. It'll get smaller. I guess I have to select it first. Make the cover stitch 3 millimeters. It'll get smaller. But what if I want to use a different style? So the cover stitch is actually coming from the fill tab. In other words, it's a satin fill. If I change it here to, let's say, be a zigzag or an E-stitch, so let's go to E-stitch, you can see right away that it takes on that sort of handmade applique appearance that you might expect from that E-stitch. And now, in this case, probably don't need the zigzag tack down. Like, if I was going to do an applique that was meant to have this homemade blanket stitch edge, then I would probably go into the special tab, and I could still go with the trim in place applique. So let's select this one. I'll still go with the trim in place, but instead of having a tack down, I'm just going to go with none. So there's my run stitch, and here's my cover stitch, and my cover stitch is set 70% to the inside and 30 to the outside. And if you want, you could even go, closer so that it really just hugs right along the edge of the applique. So if you were doing like quilted cottons, then that's kind of an appropriate way to adjust them. So now you're starting to see how adjusting the types of settings, so the different components are the guidelines, pink, tack downs, which was purple, I turned it off on this one, and then the cover stitch, which is in navy. Now, that's kind of in general how it works. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you is I'm going to actually just put a, we'll use our setup drop-down menu for options, and we'll come to the tab for hoops, and I'm going to choose to show a hoop, and I'll just select maybe a square hoop like this one here. Say OK. All right. And this, I don't think this hoop's going to be big enough. I want to go back and look at my hoop list again, and this time I'll choose, I'll just go back to the setup menu, options. I'll choose a bigger hoop, so that's too small. All right, so I chose a larger hoop. And I have only one object. I deleted the other one, so we have one object in our design. And I'm just going to select it. And notice, if I take a good close look, the object is centered in the hoop. But when I select the object jump off point, remember I showed how the stitches are going to jump up here and then jump back down? That jump off point becomes part of the shape of this object. And so even though I drew an object and I have my setup, if I look under my setup options menu and look under the hoop tab, automatic centering is turned on. And because automatic centering is turned on, if I was to, let's say, draw another applique shape, see how it automatically moved my hoop to center all of the embroidery? The only thing that's distorted a little bit is if you didn't have these jump off points and you were just looking at it, you'd say, well, Trevor, those objects aren't centered in the hoop. They're too low. And so that's a little bit of a caution that says when you're doing applique designs, if you're relying on the hoop center to be the center of the garment, you need to be careful because this embroidery is not set in the actual center of my hoop. It's set in the center if you also take into account the fact that there's the jump off point. So you can change that, and I guess one way would be, I'll just zoom out. I'll go back to my hoop sort of setup options and the tab for hoops, and I'll change to manual hoop centering versus, so automatic centering manual. I'm going to set the hoop center and say OK, and so that'll give me the option to set my hoop center, and I'll choose this point right here. Okay, so nothing is, I didn't actually change anything yet, but now if I take this embroidery element and let's say move it up, it stays. So now I could center just the embroidery element, I guess is the point, not including the jump off position. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now another thing that you can do is actually adjust that jump off position. So we chose it. When we create an applique, we can choose it, But if we want to edit it later, if you choose the reshape tool, then one of the options is this, I guess it looks like a little triangle inside of a circle, and that represents the jump off point. And so you can choose to put any jump off point that you want. So it can be as close or as far away. And you need to make sure that that's within your hoop. So even if your embroidery is in the hoop, you can't put your jump off position out here. When you go to save that design, it's going to have, I guess, difficulty, if not some kind of an error. So the idea is that under reshape, not only could you, I guess, adjust the actual shape of your applique and the starting point and the exit point of the embroidery elements, you can change the location of the jump off position. Okay. I'm just looking at my notes. What I'm going to do, I think I'll just get rid of these two objects, and I'm just going to choose to insert an image, get a graphic. So I'll travel to the folder for today's class, and this kind of maple leaves. I'll just put that inside the embroidery hoop. It looks, let's see, if I show here, so this is the idea. I made an applique and it has that blanket stitch edge. I'll just hide this up. So really the image was just a tracing. It was something, it was actually a photograph of some maple leaves that I found just on the internet. It was very low resolution. And just to make it easy for myself, I took a pencil, traced it off, and scanned in that pencil tracing. You know, it's not a 100% required step, but it didn't take me very long, and it kind of makes it a little bit easier to design the applique. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and choose the Applique tool and digitize some of these leaves. Now, I guess you kind of have to decide what's behind or in front of what. So, for example, this leaf looks like it's behind that one, behind this one, and behind that one. So this is the first leaf to do because it's three-dimensionally furthest in the background. And I'm not going to try and draw all the parts of the leaf that are missing. I'll just let it kind of have a small amount of overlap underneath wherever that applique, the overlapping applique is going to go. And I'll draw the points of my shape. I'm not going to fuss over them too much. I mean, you know, it's a shape of a maple leaf. So who's to say it could be wrong? And also, I wanted to make sure I got the applique shape drawn before my stupid little glitch caught up to me with digitizing. Anyhow, so I've drawn my first applique shape. And what I'm going to do is draw 2 or 3 of them so that you can see how overlapping appliques can be dealt with. So again, I'm not going to, I'll just hide my, when I turn the True View on, it makes it a little bit hard to see through it to the artwork. I can either type T on my keyboard to get rid of the True View, or I can type S on my keyboard to hide the stitches, and it makes it just a little bit easier to digitize without having, you know, the realistic look of the stitches on my screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw this shape. Okay. All right, so I'll turn my stitches back on. So I've created 2. Now, obviously, they were meant to be different colors. So I'm going to select the second one, and I'll come down to my color palette and just choose the color number 2. So what happens is I still have pink and purple for my applique placement line and zigzag line, but then I have a different color for the cover stitch. So it lets you know that it's a different, I guess, design element. I could go ahead and select these and fill them in with some kind of fabric, whatever you want. They're actually supposed to be different, so why don't I make this one pink and that one purple, whatever. And maybe I'll just do a third one so that I can kind of demonstrate with at least 2 or 3 on my screen. See, now that I've added those appliques, I also have a hard time seeing through the artwork to it. And one of the display tabs is actually for show applique fabric, so I can also hide that and show that with a click, with a single click. All right, so now I've got my tool selected, and I'll just go ahead and draw this. And like I said, I'm not going to fuss over the points too much. Certainly you're welcome to, although I will say I'm digitizing at several 100% zoomed in right now. And so if I do miss on my screen by, oh, let's say a millimeter at 400% zoomed in, it's like saying you missed by 1/4 of a millimeter at actual size. So it's not to say you don't need to be careful, but I also don't think you need to fuss over nothing when you digitize. All right, so here you can see I've created 3 applique objects. I got 2 of them filled in with red. Or with applique fabric. Why don't I choose another color for the last one? Okay, and I could do the 4th one, but I think you'll get the idea. So right now, if I take a good close look, I'm going to turn the 3D visualizer off and turn the applique fabric off. See here how the cover stitch for the sort of lower left leaf is sewing underneath the applique of the top left leaf that comes on top. Well, that's going to leave, I guess, some bulk, and it's just unnecessary. We don't need that kind of cover stitch under there. So what I can do is I can select, I'm going to select all 3 of these appliques, and I'm going to come to the Applique tab, and notice here I have 2 options. One of them is called Combine Applique. The other one's called Partial Applique. So Partial Applique is the one that will remove the stitches for the pieces of applique that are underneath another layer of applique. And basically all I have to do is select the objects, as I do now, and just click on Partial Applique. And if I zoom in, here you can see that for this light blue applique shape, it has a run stitch placement line, a zigzag tack down, and then a dark blue or a light blue cover, but the cover stitch only comes up to here, and it's been removed by the software where those 2 objects overlapped. And same thing with this with the navy blue one, its cover stitch was removed here and here, where that light blue sort of cover of this other leaf went over top of that. And so I guess that's the beauty of using the applique tool, is that if you have overlapping appliques, it will quickly allow you to remove those using the partial applique tool. The other thing that I wanted to look at before I move on to my next topic is just kind of an in general thing with appliques and using the cover stitch. I'm going to turn the True View back on, and maybe I'll just take a look at the design a little bit. And right away I'm kind of zeroing in on down here, where, remember I said I didn't fuss over my points too much, and here you've got points that if I type the stitches off, I mean, just looks innocent enough shape to me, but when the stitches are there, you can see some sort of difficulty getting around that corner. And the tightness of the curves combined with the smart corners is just awkward, to say the least. If I select the object, one thing I could do is I could actually just use the reshape tool, where is it, and just adjust some of those, get the reshape tool. If I adjust the angle of these points, I can probably get them to a point where they look just about the same, look, and there's no kind of smart cornering at all. So I just had to fuss with those points a little bit. I'll hit undo undo, undo a bunch of times because I kind of fussed over it. So there it was. And I just had to reduce until I got it to be, I guess, enough of an open angle inside here to be able to control that. Or going in and actually sort of choosing the style of corners could help. But I find that just fussing over the points in anywhere where you get a corner where you're not sure you like it is enough to get it to look, with the appropriate style of stitching. And that's probably not exclusive to Applique. I would think anytime you're working with the Input C tool, you're going to run into situations where you have sometimes smart corners that you just might think you'd rather not have. Sometimes we love them and they're great. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show about appliques, well, by the way, I showed the photograph of this design. I had done it with the settings, so I'll just select all three of those, select all three of them. Sorry. Select all three of those appliques. They were done as trim-in-place appliques. They were done with no tack-down stitch, and their cover stitch was set as an E-stitch. And the offset was set very close to 100%, probably around 90, something like that. Yeah. And I think this one might show a little better. Yeah, so you get the idea. All right, so anyhow, what I'm going to do, I'll just go Control A and delete to get rid of all these objects. I'll just create a couple of applique shapes here myself. All right, so again, two appliques that overlap each other. I can select them both, and I can use partial applique, and that will remove the stitching. Use the tool. There we go. That will remove the stitching underneath the area where the two overlap. Now, another tool that we have, if I select both objects, is Combine Applique Components. So if I choose this, I get a warning. It says proceeding with this will cause your applique objects to be broken apart. And do you want to save this, or are you okay with that? And that's fine. I'm anticipating this because I know what I'm doing, and that's what I want to do. I want to break them apart and say, okay. And so what happens is it takes our applique object and it breaks it into its individual components and it combines them. So it does the first pink tack down stitch, then the second pink tack down stitch, and then a jump off. And then it does the first blue tack down or purple tack down, the second purple tack down, and then a jump off. And then it does the first blue cover stitch and the second blue cover stitch. And so what it did was it took the two appliques and it combined all their elements, and it basically, I guess, reduced the number of color stops. So that's the idea of using the Combine Applique tool. In general, and maybe what I'll do is, where's my mouse? I'm just going to select this one and move it over here. Well, of course, I only selected the one part of it. All right. So remember this one here that we used the partial applique to cover the embroidery there. Well, now that when we break it apart, that gets, I guess, lost. If I turn back into an applique, can I do that? Yeah, because it's broken apart, so it doesn't. Normally, I'm just going to show, if I use the break apart applique tool, I'm going to select, we'll draw a new applique, one that isn't already broken apart. Just some shape. So this one is still all an applique tool. Okay, so when you select that object, and I'm just going to choose to break apart. So I right click and I can choose break apart. There's also a break apart tool found on the toolbars. Let's see where that is. I always use the right click. Well, there was a tool on the toolbar. I'll look for it again later. I use break apart on the right click. Now, here you'll see that when it broke my object apart, I've got, again, the same kind of concept, run stitch, the zigzag tack down, but this time it left my cover stitch as an applique. And that's an interesting thing, because if there was, let's say, another applique that was digitized on top of this, I could still select those two and use that partial applique tool, and even though this was broken apart, I was still able to apply that partial applique based upon the fact that it was still an applique object. Now, if you select on that applique object and then use the break apart again, it turns it into an input C. And once it's an input C, it will no longer function like an applique, which means it won't be affected by things like the partial applique tool. So when you have a sort of fresh applique object, as this one is, and the first time you break it apart, it leaves the satin column as an actual applique shape. But if you want to convert that to input C, you can just choose break apart again. It doesn't actually break anything apart, it's just one object, but it changes it to be an input C. Perhaps slightly technical, but might be, I guess, useful information at some point in time. One of the things I wanted to show, I'm going to pop over to Corel Graphics mode, because one of the things you can do is when you have a vector image or any kind of, I guess, graphics, graphical text, or I guess a vector image, you can convert those to be an applique automatically. Perhaps what I'll do is just choose to make a shape. So I'll grab the ellipse tool and draw an ellipse. Now, if I select that ellipse shape, and up here where it says to convert, I can tag it as an applique. See here? Tag as applique. So if I click on that, it actually kind of gives it a little dotted line. And now if I was to go ahead and say to convert, it would actually convert it. And when it comes in on this side, in the embroidery mode, it's actually already made into an applique. And it's made on an applique based upon the last settings that I used. So it's got, you can see it's still got that zigzag, the E-stitch for the tack down instead of the zigzag. That was kind of the original default. I had changed that. So I'm going to go back to graphics mode. Maybe do, I think under basic shapes, I could do like this little happy face shape, tag it as an applique, and then convert. And so what do I get is the happy face embroidery design, but here it's, well, first of all, there's the first applique. I'll just get rid of that one that I made. But here's the circle, and there's an applique for this eye and an applique for this eye, and there's also an applique for the mouth. Now, the mouth, it still thinks it's an applique, but really there's nothing, there's no inside to that. So this is a good example of where you might want to take that one applique shape and break it apart. And then I'm just going to get rid of the first two colors altogether, including the jump offs, and I'll just delete them. So I'm in this case, I've just left the satin column. If I want, I can break it apart. It's not even applique. But the other three here, this is an example of where you might want to select those three and then use combine applique, which gives me the warning, which I'll say yes to, which will then make all of the pink objects. So there's your run stitch placement lines, and then here's your zigzag tack downs, and then your satin covers. Yeah. One more time over to Corel Graphics mode. Put some text in there. Big TC for my initials, and maybe I'll make it like a little bit fatter font. It's up to you. I'll choose to tag it as applique and then convert it into an applique object. So yeah, you can convert your vectors into applique. You can also convert embroidery elements to applique. So let's just say you had a design that was made using complex fill. And so you have this piece of embroidery that, if we look at the stitching, you know, a big piece of weave fill that you've made. And so the background of your design originally was a weave fill, and now you want to convert it to applique. You can actually just select that complex fill shape and then click on the applique tab. And again, it asks me down here, it says enter the entry point, blah, blah, blah. I'll just hit enter, and it completes the shape. And let's see if I zoom in. Okay, so you can see that it's made an applique out of what was a parallel weave fill shape. So, okay, where's my mouse? It just has trouble with this. Sometimes when I get lost in this class, the mouse just disappears. All right. Sorry, I get distracted. Another thing I wanted to show, and maybe I'll just get rid of a few of these appliques to demonstrate this. Here I have this applique face. Let's just say you wanted to, I'm going to do a file and then print preview, and just show in here that you have, I guess, in your worksheet options. So if I go to the options, several things that I can I guess choose to include. So all of these are different sort of choices through your options. And I'm going to choose, so I want to make a production color film, I believe, is what's going to give me the sort of visualization of the steps of my applique. So if I go to 2 pages, and then I go to my next page, so this is what adding the color film shows us, is it shows us the actual applique objects within the color film, showing you how the design is going to sew. Another option that you may want to choose to have in here would be things like, let's see here, color film. Well, that escaped me. I thought there was another point that might have been of interest in here. These are all the different ways that you can control your printing, you know, in general. I thought I had notes. Anyway, sometimes going through to, you know, the print preview and just showing like the actual color film can be helpful. Another thing that you may want to do when you're doing appliques is this, and I'll just close my print preview. What if you wanted to use a laser cutter or a plotter cutter or some sort of graphics software to cut this out? And so really, what would you want to cut out but the pink run stitch lines. These are the ones, and let's just say that that's another function of why you might need to break apart an applique. Because if I break it apart, I can then select just those run stitch lines that I want. And in this case, what I might do is say copy, and then start up a new sort of blank workspace, paste them in. Oh, that's interesting. There's a graphic came. Let's go back to the other design that we were working on. And say copy, and then come to a new design. Oh, this mouse. Paste. And I got that, fixed it. The point is, let's just say that this is what you wanted to cut out with your plotter cutter. Well, then you could convert those to be graphics, so converting your embroidery into graphic objects. And now that those graphic objects are in the Corel Graphics mode, you could then export them in sort of any number of formats that may be required. So if you chose export, depending on the style of cutting machine you have, I have like a little plotter cutter, and that plotter cutter can take a DXF format in its software, can also take an SVG format in its software. And so these are different, I guess, formats that you can export to. And so you'll need to know, based upon the cutting information or the cutter that you're using, what format you need to export your graphics to. But those will be the exact size graphics that if I cut these out, then I could use my plotter cutter to cut that out. Then when I did a pre-cut applique, it would be easy because I would have exactly the shape saved and ready to go. I'm just sort of reviewing my notes to make sure that I covered all of the different types of things that I wanted to talk about. I think what I'm going to do before I forget is I'm going to pop open my questions box and just see if, well, during the class anybody had asked me any questions that I could either review or answer now. Sandy said my voice was fading in and out again. Hopefully that corrected itself. One question I had was, how do you get the stitches to show up? And I wonder if I've already answered that. Oh, and Sandy said my voice was okay now, so that's good to know. Maybe let me know if you still have a question with that. Leila? And can you show the steps for an applique of a 4-inch 2-layer twill letter onto an athlete jersey? Well, let's just imagine, I think I can answer that. Let's just imagine that we had a letter, so whatever. Here's my initials again, a big letter T, to go onto a jersey. I'll make it bigger. And I'll tag it as applique and then convert it to embroidery mode. So here I have a design that has, maybe I can just get rid of these other parts. It just has my letter done as an applique. So assuming that you want to do it as a twill letter, what I'm imagining is that the cover, so I'm going to get my, sorry. Probably for a tackle twill letter, you would want to have a pre-cut letter. So I'm thinking like the kind that you buy from like stalls or whatever. And so you would have a pre-cut letter, and it may even I guess, give you a digitized shape for that. Maybe, I'm not exactly sure how that works, but let's just say you had to cut your own. So we'll be able to digitize our own shape. We're going to choose pre-cut. And we're going to have probably a run stitch guideline. And then for the tack down, I might just leave that as none. And then for the cover stitch, maybe we'll go 3 millimeters. And we'll go on the cover stitch fill to be a zigzag. So if I take a look, you can see how when I create, so there's the placement line. The machine sews the placement line, stops. It shows it here as different colors, but I wouldn't actually change the color of the thread as much as it's meant to indicate to the machine a color stop. Now, after the machine stops and you apply your fabric to this shape, then it's going to do that zigzag tack down, walking around quickly to... So I'm not sure if that answers your question in terms of the style of applique that you were looking for. I'm just going to bring back up my control panel and see what we got. Okay. So Layla says you still, by the way, I'll wait and see what Shirley says if you want me to go on any further, if that answers your question. Neela asked the question, how do you get the stitches to show up? And she says she still needs it answered. And I don't think I quite understand what you mean to get them to show up. When I create, maybe if I just step backwards, and I'm just going to go back over to the software and take the Applique tool and draw a shape again. All right, so I'm drawing points. I'll have to start over it, let go. Now when I'm done, see, I won't close the shape. I put my last point here. When I hit enter, it closes the shape. It's now asking me enter point 1 on boundary 2. If you're not sure where, right down on the bottom left says enter point 1 in boundary 2. I'll go ahead and draw boundary 2. Hit enter. Now it says, oh, you bugger, it let go. Let me go a little quicker and try again. I'll draw points and hit enter. That's boundary 1. I'll draw points and hit enter. That's boundary 2. And no boundary 3, so I'm going to hit enter again. Enter the entry point. I'll click it. Enter the exit point. I'll click 1. Enter the frame out position. I'll click 1. So if you want to click and choose all the steps when you're done, the stitches show up. If you do what I like to do, which is just simply draw the shape, hit enter, and then enter, and then enter, stitches will show up. So it's a matter of saying enter, 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 which basically says you can decide where to start and stop, and you can decide the frame out position. I know that I can change them anyways because I can select that shape, choose reshape, and still choose the start point, the exit point, and the frame out position myself. If you don't see the stitches as I see them, you may need to turn stitches on. These are your view menus, so show stitches, show 3D view. These are on-off buttons. So I hope that answers your question. If not, I'll stick with you here. Let me know if if there's more that you'd like to have answered. Anyhow, I think I've taken care of everybody's questions, and I hope that everybody enjoyed the class about applique and learning to use the applique tools and creating appliques. Certainly you're welcome to get in touch with me if you don't remember. My email address is trevor@sunsetstitches.com. If you'd like to get a copy of the class by recording, I'll be happy to get one sent to you. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks very much for attending. And